I
I
could never
will.
remember which
Mm,
version of English uses Z versus Z because I grew up with British English, then I switched to Canadian English, and then I'm now in American English, and I can always confuse them.
I think it's just us that use Z.
Oh,
And I think Canada, the UK, and everybody else uses Z.
yeah. I always confuse one switch because Canadian English is halfway between American and British.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, pick a side. Just
No.
pick a side. Just pick a side.
They're kind of part of the realm.
Yeah, but they didn't keep all the British spellings. So some of their spellings are more British, some of their spellings are more American.
Okay.
So, for example, if you look at words like standardize, I believe the British English would be ISE and the Canadian is IZE,
Mm,
like the Americans.
that's
But then they
confusing.
will use color COLOUR,
Uh-huh.
right? There's a U, whereas the Americans got rid of the U. But anyway, my argument is that English is a Creole.
Yes, it
And
is.
and I think we should have the same status as English.
Hmm.
Like Creoles are seen as less than real languages, but
Right.
one of the most used languages in the world, English, is a Creole. And according to some definitions, right?
What definitions are you using to define English as a Creole?
I believe the definition was something like it's a language that is derived from multiple other languages. So English has Latin, Greek, German, some French, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it's made of a bunch of languages, cultures. But then some other people are like, well, it has to be in the context of, was it colonialism or something along those lines? And I'm like, well, that's just
Hmm.
racist. Sorry, but you're just trying to keep yourself out of this.
Right? Like I was thinking that too. Is it not considered that because it's not, it's not the brown people's languages
Yeah.
or yeah,
Yeah.
boo.
Yeah. So in my book,
Hmm.
the first definition makes more sense because the
Hmm.
second definition is just, one of the funny things I saw in my research about this series was the British believed at some point that queerness, like
Mm.
gayness or whatever their word was at the time, only existed in countries that were between latitude 45 north and 30 south. And I'm like, so Britain is, you know, further up. So you're just trying to keep yourself out of it, you know?
That's ridiculous.
So that's the same vibe I'm getting
Mm.
when I hear people say, well, it's not a Creole if it's not, in the context of colonization. And I'm like,
Hmm.
you're just trying to carve yourself out of it. So you're not one of us. No, 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 no.
I
I could
read
be wrong, but that's just my first impression when I'm like, is it though?
I think that's an excellent point. That's such an excellent point because English, it's my language and it's hard. I see people who are learning English struggle and it's not an easy language because there's so many rules taken from so many other different languages that we're trying to fit into this nice, neat package. So
Yeah.
you
But at
should.
the same time, it is also simpler than a lot of those languages it came from. Like, if you look at, French, for example, there's so many more rules.
Mm.
Like the grammar is so much more complicated. There's all these little words that you're supposed to put in different places, like, and you're like, why are they there? What do they mean? They don't mean really anything alone, but you have to have it in there, you know? It's like, but English was like, all of that fluff, we don't need it, get rid of it. That's a Creole. I'm just saying, it is a Creole.
That's a good and that goes back to what you said before, that you think that Mauritian is easier because it's the French without all the fluff. So,
Yeah.
it's with the language without all the fluff, it maybe yeah,
Yeah,
English is a Creole.
it is. It has room to grow into a better Creole
Mm.
because I think pronunciation in especially American English is so complicated.
Oh, okay. How so?
Because when you look at a word, you can't tell how to pronounce it. Is it read? Is it read?
Mm,
Is it record or is it record?
right.
It depends on the context. Like that is mind. Like, either put accents on those things so we know which one is which, or simplify it. Just
Mhm.
you know. So
Make it
I think
simpler.
it can evolve a little bit to make it
Yeah.
simpler.
I definitely think accents would help, and I think that, growing up and I would see accents on words and I would never I wouldn't understand what the accent was for, but now that I've been studying or dabbling in languages now more so over the last few years, I'm realizing that the accents are so important, especially with French. Like, now that
Oh
I
yeah.
finally understand to use, like, the past I'm looking up at my cheat sheet right here on the wall, but, like, knowing the difference between j'ai été and j'étais, I'm like, that it sounds so silly, but understanding that accent on the final E, and I'm like, "Oh, now I know how to use it. Oh, now I hear the difference between the 2." And
Yeah.
there's a lot of words in French I don't hear the difference between, like the word for wind and the word for 20. I can't hear the difference between them.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's very common for
Mhm.
English speakers. And that's when Creole makes it better, right?
Yeah.
But to me, like English actually is a tonal language that
Mm.
doesn't have a way to tell you the tones because if you m- put the accent or the emphasis on the wrong place in a word in English, people don't understand you.
Mm. That's true. The wrong emphasis on a
Yeah.
different syllable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is always tripping me up
Mm.
because so my husband has a lot of times corrected me on, how to say those words because I thought I was confused because of French, because French will emphasize different ways, right? But I recently finally figured out that it's not the French, it's the British English that's messing me up because the
Oh.
British emphasize a different way. I saw a video a few weeks ago. Somebody was interviewing a British person and they were saying those words, and I was like, oh, I just figured it out. They say it wrong. I mean, they say it different. And then it's been messing with my head because I probably heard it this way when I was a kid, but now I'm speaking in America and this
Right.
pattern is still stuck in my head sometimes. And
Yeah.
now I don't know what I'm saying.
The only thing I think of are things that are maybe spelled the same but pronounced differently, like controversy versus controversy, but that's
Oh, okay. So that one, for example,
Mhm.
controversy, con is the emphasis.
Mhm.
And
Controversy.
what was the second one?
Controversy.
Yeah. So
Controversy, controversy.
yeah. So the second syllable is emphasized.
Mhm.
So that's what messes me up.
Right.
So sometimes I'm using the British syllable emphasis, but with the American pronunciation, and people are like, huh?
Mm, I see. Aluminum, aluminium.
Yeah. Do you know when you speak languages, to me,
Mhm.
I don't know if it's because I'm a musically inclined person, but I, I think in melodies. So
Oh.
the reason why I sound like I have an American accent is because I learned in my head what an American sounds like when they speak.
Huh.
So if you say a sentence in French and you say a sentence in English, the melodic arc of it is different in French and English.
Mhm.
And I believe it's also different in British English and in American English.
Mhm.
So, s yeah, that's I don't know, that's a whole other rabbit hole.
No, it definitely is. Maybe you can come back and we can talk about that, or we should do a live or something because I'm always so interested in musicians and how their minds work when they are multilingual, when they're learning different languages, because it's different for everybody. But the way that you process the sounds and the melody, because every language has a melody. So as a musician, it's like, of course you're picking up on that. Of course
Yeah.
that's the first thing that you're noticing, and it would cause either would be confusing for you to learn certain things, or it would be easy for you to pick up certain things because you can attach yourself to that melodic point of the language.
Yeah, I think it made it a lot easier to pretend like I'm a native speaker. Like, I can speak French with a Parisian accent, even though I've never lived in Paris.
Teach me your ways.
Because, if I learned French, I listened to French in Mauritius. The TV channels were all from France. But
Mhm,
when we speak French in Mauritius, we don't speak with a French accent. We speak
mhm,
with a Mauritian accent.
mm.
And I remember that I had this one song that I released in French, and my cousin's wife, she at first didn't believe that it was me because she was like, "But she sounds French." I was like, "Thank you."
I don't know if this is possible because I'm not a musician, so I'm forever in awe of musicians and what they can do. So if I'm asking this question and it doesn't make sense, just tell me. But would there be a way for you to demonstrate the melody of how, let's say, Mauritian French sounds, France French sounds, or maybe how American English sounds, just so we can hear what you're hearing, like
Yeah,
melodically?
yeah. Give me a sentence maybe that might be helpful.
Does the sentence have to make sense?
I mean, it has to be something that people would say so that I can put it in my head.
Okay. How about, would you like chicken for dinner?
Okay, so English American would be, "Would you like chicken for dinner?" But in French, I think the way I've heard it the most would be, "Would you like chicken for?" Or maybe that's more British. British would be more like, "Would you like chicken for dinner?" Da 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 da. Whereas American would be da 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 da. Da. Right?
So
Um,
there's a rise at the end when we ask our questions.
I don't know if it's universally like that, but I think what I've memorized is patterns that I've heard
Mm,
either on TV or just in everyday life, how people say things. So when I imagine it in my head, I'm usually imagining either someone I know or just like an amalgamate person that
mhm,
sounds like that language, right?
mhm,
And so I hear it with that accent,
mhm.
and then I can imitate it if I hear it. I I love talking about this. So let's say I'm trying to imagine like my dad saying something
Mhm.
and then like my husband saying the same thing. So
Okay.
let's say you have to go somewhere
Mhm.
and you need some information, and my dad is saying, "Well, you can ask them when you get there," right? So he would say, "When you get there, you can ask them."
Okay.
Like there's a bit more of a da 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 da
Mhm,
or da 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 da. When you
mhm,
get there, you can ask them.
mhm.
But I think in American English, people would be more like, "You can ask them when you get there." Like, but I don't know that I know exactly the patterns of like questions are like this or statements are like that. I think it's more depending on the phrase. I don't know. It's very hard to explain. Like
Mhm.
it's super not scientific.
It doesn't have to be. This is it's your experience, and I was just really curious what that what that looks like or how that lives in your head, how that sounds. Because, like I said, we process it all differently. It makes sense to us all in a different way. So, I really appreciate you digging in your mind to
Yeah, because I feel like, Mauritian the Mauritian accent is very close to French accent,
Mm,
I think, in the melody that it follows. So I feel like, okay, I hope French people will not get mad with this, but to me, in French, sounds like da 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 da. Like
mm,
there's a bit more. I don't know. Yeah, I can I can see it, I can hear it, but it's really hard for me to articulate it.
I see.
And I think when you compare people who have perfect American accent
Mhm,
versus a slight accent,
mhm.
I think that's the difference, where the
Yeah.
melody, like the pronunciation of the word sounds American, but maybe the
Mhm,
melody's a little bit off.
mhm.
So instead of maybe the melody's a little bit off, you could say maybe the melody is a bit off,
I see.
like
Yeah.
just very, very slight variation.
Mhm.
And you're like, huh, that sounds a little bit different from what
Yeah.
I'm used to.
Right.
And I think that's usually how I pick it up.
Mhm.
I just know the patterns that I typically hear from French people, that I typically hear from Mauritian people, and I can hear it for like Hakka in Mauritian Creole, but yeah.
That's amazing. I'm so amazed by that. I never gave it thought to, like, "Oh, people from here speak in this way." I never analyzed it.
Yeah.
I never gave myself the time or the space to do that. Um,
Well, probably also because you're in New York and you just hear so many different versions. It's
yeah.
hard to find the pattern when there's so many different
Mhm.
ones. Whereas, I grew up with very limited set,
Yeah.
you know? And then to me, because I'm not particularly I have very conflicting feelings about this, but growing up, I really wanted to leave Mauritius and I wanted to go to Canada. I had no intention of moving to the US. That just happened as a fluke. But I wanted to move to Canada. I was obsessed with it and I wanted to sound Canadian.
Mm,
So
mhm.
when my cousins would come to Mauritius as a kid, I would speak English to them. I would practice, and I had kind of memorized what their voices sound like, how they say words. And when I would try to speak English in my head, I would hear their voices
Mm,
speaking
mhm,
it with their Canadian accent.
mhm.
So maybe it was because I was obsessed with it that I developed this very uncanny skill.
Do you have perfect pitch by any chance?
No.
Okay. I've heard that sometimes people with perfect pitch are pick up, maybe quote unquote lose their accents or can change their accents
Oh,
authentically very easily. So,
interesting. Yeah. I
hmm,
wouldn't say it was easy, but I felt like I had a system for it.
right.
It took some time to even the French, I can do it, but I have to think about it.
I see.
There's like a buffering that has to happen where it's like language loading.
Yeah. Oh boy. I'm always buffering. Just FYI.